Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Here is another video about diabetes. Now today's video is about time in range and about time in tight range. If you have diabetes, it's important that you keep your blood glucose within a certain range. And there is what we call international consensus that people with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes should try to stay between 70 and 180 milligrams per deciliter at least 70% of the time. That is between 3.9 and 10 millimoles per liter. Now that is for adults with diabetes. And for women who are pregnant, it's slightly different. Now 70% of the time of a day is exactly 16 hours and 48 minutes. Now let's say that is almost 17 hours a day. You can use your blood glucose sensor, if you have one, to check your time in range. It's helpful to know time in range, and if you know your time in range, you can maybe tell your medical team when you visit them for a review, what it is. Or you might already share your glucose sensor data with them anyway, and then they can check this themselves. It is, in addition to something like HbA1c, it's a helpful variable to have. It's in many ways, so this time in range is in many ways more useful than simply the average glucose level. As you know, the HbA1c is essentially a blood test that gives you an indication of your average blood glucose over a roughly 3-month period. The problem though with HbA1c, or you could say the shortcoming, is that it does not tell us anything about how much of the time your blood glucose was too low or too high. You can have a great HbA1c, but with lots of lows and maybe lots of highs as well, so that is averaging out into a good HbA1c. Now the good thing with time in range is that it is really about this fluctuation as well. So because if you go too low or if you go too high, that will affect your time in range. So that's why it's useful. And you might then ask, so why do we still have this HbA1c? But the reason for that is multifold. For one, it is a real blood test, so to speak. So real in the sense that the doctor can do the blood test and they can check it in the laboratory. So it works even if your CGM, if you didn't have a CGM, or if your CGM data was not collected all the time, or maybe your CGM was not reliable for whatever reason. So it is a hard real data point. The HbA1c is useful for that. For HbA1c, when it comes to targets, for most people, for adults, it will be below 7% or below 53 millimoles per mole. Now, as for glucose, there are different scales for HbA1c, and it can be a bit confusing. It's important to realize that the HbA1c numbers, such as 7% or 53, are on a totally different scale than glucose. And on the internet you can find calculators to compare these values. I have a link below the video to one of these calculators. The argument is, the scientific argument is that for most people who have a time in range of 70% or more will also have an HbA1c below 7% or below 53. And that's why they use the 70% number as a target. Now, my question to you is, do you actually keep track of time in range? And if you do, you might be interested to know that there is also something called time in tight range. Now, interestingly, the CGM apps, to the best of my knowledge, such as the Libre or the Dexcom, they will show you time in range. And I think you can also configure the range that you want to look at. So you can change it to something that we call time in tight range. So what is time in tight range? It is the range between 70 and 140, or 3.9, between 3.9 and 7.8 millimole per liter. And there was recently an interesting article about that in the journal Diabetes Care, which is published by the American Diabetes Association, and I have a link to that paper below the video. But the reason why time in tight range is useful is that it is roughly speaking, the normal blood glucose range in people without diabetes. So in that sense, it makes sense to use it if you say, well, I want my blood glucose range to be exactly the same as in people without diabetes. But then the interesting thing is actually that there is still a debate on what doctors should or can recommend their patients. So for example, while there's agreement that 70% or more is the recommendation for time in range, there is no standard yet for what the percentage for time in tight range would be. Now in the article, link below, about time in tight range, the authors argue that a reasonable target for time in tight range is 50% or more. A time in tight range target of greater than 50% is a reasonable treatment target in individuals living with type 1 diabetes. It's widely accepted that high time in tight range is desirable. However, a specific time in tight range treatment goal for those living with type 1 diabetes has not yet been established. The criticism of this tight target is that it might lead to more hypoglycemia in some people with type 1 diabetes. I have a link to that criticism below the video as well. And I quote from this critique on the article, which was published in the same journal. And that was actually published last April. And they say, in the critique, the authors say, a common type 1 diabetes patient phenotype, so basically what a type of patient is the patient who strives for perfect glycemic control and, as a result, is constantly hypoglycemic. These are some of the most challenging patients to treat, and they often concern providers the most. As a medical community, we need to be careful not to heighten fears of hyperglycemia by redefining what hyperglycemia is for our patients. Changing our guidelines from staying between 70 and 180, so between 3.9 and 10, to staying between 70 and 140, or 3.9 and 7.8, without documented data on the benefits would represent a major shift in our current management and messaging to patients. So, in short, they argue that telling people to try to have their glucose in a tighter range can, among some patients, lead to more hypos among those patients, which obviously is a problem. So, do you agree with this? As someone who has type 1 or maybe type 2, leave a comment below the video if you do. Or do you think that they maybe overestimate people's capacity to prevent serious hypos? I mean, you could argue that those patients who might look a lot at their CGMs, maybe they use it effectively and can prevent hypos. But I think this critique was written by medical professionals who have a lot of experience with all sorts of patients who people vary. People are very different. As a psychologist, I can say that people have very different personalities and values and aims and anxieties, so they might work differently. So in any case, these authors that had this sort of critical discussion of time in tight range as a target argue that there might be patients for whom this tighter target might not work because they would then end up having far too many hypos. So that's an interesting discussion, and I can already say that we also contributed with a commentary on this topic, which I think is very valuable. I will make a different video about it at some point when that comes out. So at our university, we do research on diabetes, and currently we have a really nice study running, and that's an online study. It takes, I think, 15 minutes or so if you have that time, and if you have diabetes or not. you can participate. So have a look at the link, because we really need more participants in our study, and this study is is ethically approved by the university and so on, and it's run by a PhD student in our university, together with me. So we were doing research all the time, and maybe you already have participated in that study, so you will see if you click the link. I've also links to the papers that I mentioned, and some more guidance on time in range. So I hope that you find that helpful. With this channel, what I'd like to do is to take some of the scientific or medical concepts and explain what they are, but also to show you actually where you can find the evidence yourself on the internet. I hope you found this video useful. If you do, please like and subscribe to this channel. The more people subscribe, the easier people can find this channel. Thank you for watching, and see you soon again.